Welcome, everybody. I am Joe Pierce, RecordPoint's head of product. I lead up our AI governance and am expanding our data governance offering to help everyone reduce their data risk and action their data with things like AI. And I can say that I am extremely excited about today's topic and guest. We are going to spend some time talking about strategies to build trust in AI through governance. So how do we take all those big business propositions and get them into our enterprises? Before I introduce our really amazing guest, I'd like to ask that you post questions into the chat box. We will be watching that throughout the conversation, as well as at the end, save a few minutes to answer anything that we haven't gotten to. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Amanda DeLuke. She is a senior privacy analyst at the online community and member engagement platform HigherLogic. She is also a member of the Messaging Malware Mobile Anti-Abuse Working Group. That is a bit of a mouthful, and I did have to read that. It's a great name. and a part of CIPP, which is the privacy think tank within our industry. We also have with us today Dan Stalker. Dan is co-chair of the Cloud Security Alliance's AI Initiative for AI Governance. He works within AI security in the industry, brings some great insights there. He's an IIPP fellow. And I'll do a little bit of publicity for Dan. If you get a chance to read his Cloud Security Alliance's Don't Panic, Get Real About AI Governance white paper that he pushed out, that he's the lead author on, it's a great lead. So Dan, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll jump over to Amanda just so everyone can know who you are?
Thank you very much for that unsolicited plug, Joe. I'm exceptionally happy to be here. I think this is a really important topic, not just because everybody's talking about it, but because there's real things hanging in the balance. And so to the extent that I can help people sort out their own understanding and then maybe move to something that is more actionable, that would make me feel very successful here.
Well said. Amanda?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. So excited to be talking to you all today. So I am a senior privacy analyst. I've been with HigherLogic almost 11 years, and I actually come from a deliverability background. So used to manage mail servers and having to understand canned spam. And then, of course, GDPR. I got really excited by that and wanted to read through all of the legislation, actually, believe it or not. And a few privacy certifications later, here I am, and I am managing our privacy program, as well as being a privacy stakeholder in our AI governance program. So very excited to be here.
You know that you're really into it when you read the legislation and don't just ask ChatGPT to summarize it. So, kudos to you for that.
Out on paper, even like highlighting it. Yep.
Love it. Love it.
Yep.
This is why you both are excellent guests for this. So yeah, let's jump right into things. Amanda, can you start us off and you talk about what makes AI so fundamentally different from other technologies that we really need kind of a new governance approach to it? Why are we having this conversation today?
Right. So here's how I look at AI as it relates to the program and creative governance, okay? I always like to say, let's be thrifty. What does that mean when I say let's be thrifty? That means let's leverage our existing program that we have. There's people out there that are GRCs, that run governance, risk, and compliance, right? So there's already an established process for AI. And really what this is all about is just basically bolting on AI into your existing systems and your process and sort of leveraging what you currently have. I think that's really important as you look at AI being a brand new technology, but not having to rewrite all of your processes and policies and procedures, right? That's already a heavy lift. It's really about just taking this brand new technology, an evolving technology, right? And just incorporating it into your current process.
Very good. And so there's a lot of people out there that are almost sticking their head in the sand. They're kind of like, it's too scary to touch right now. I know everyone wants to do it, but we're going to put it to the side and figure it out because we don't have a mature enough privacy program or information security program to do today. So Dan, maybe you can address what are the risks and the consequences of taking that approach and not getting ahead of the AI really boulder that's starting to roll down the hill?
So I start with the business wants to act from a concept of self-interest. It wants to make money. And so one of the ways it could do that is taking risk. But if we take the analogy, for example, of learning to juggle, we may start with a couple of balls, maybe not heavy ones, and we work up to where now we can go from 2 balls to 3 balls, and so on, until if you're ambitious, you may get up to juggling bowling balls and chainsaws, for example. On that continuum, right, you can't go straight to an advanced state. You have to build to it. And moving from having a server room in the back of your building to working in the cloud, and then having chatbots that can help support your processes, first-party processes, and then moving those out to support your public, right, consumers, and whoever your business, if it's a B2C, for example, and then on to fully automating various types of processes. Those are they're step functions, basically. And so you would not want to go from one to the next without really trying to understand it. The risk of putting your head in the sand about all that is that you will either oversimplify it and be late, because when you encounter it, then it will be overwhelming. And also that if it's done that way, you are leaving risks untended to, and that compounds and then comes back at the end of the day. So going in with your eyes open, it is a process, and it is, I always view things on a maturity process, starting with less, moving to more capable, et cetera. And I think that is a great framework for understanding what it is for any one particular situation.
So I love the juggling analogy. I do have to ask, can you juggle, Dan?
Juggling is not one of my skills. That's partly why I'm fascinated by it. How about that?
The analogy still works. I like it. Let's maybe bring it in a little more like specifically. What do you think is the most like specific underestimated risk in AI adoption today?
I think it's about representing what you have and understanding it. So part of my background, as you know, is in compliance and advisory for compliance and helping people wrap their head around things that are new and or scary. And in that setting, right, part of what you need to do is understand what you have. And the very most traditional way of breaking that down is into concepts of people. You've got people who do things. You've got processes which organize how they do them and are intended to reflect management of quality and with outcomes in mind. And you have technology, which is an acceleration way of getting more for the same amount of time for people. And each of those things require different management, right? People require HR, processes require governance and other types of administrative things. And technology is, the IT and security and other types of things. AI, and I want to use that term generally, but let's say I'm talking about generative AI and not older style predictive and quantitative models. Gen AI is interesting and different because it simulates human judgment. It does so in a way that is devoid of common sense, but it is a way of putting, in essence, more human-like things at more points in whatever it is you do. And so understanding that it's like humans means you need to have controls like humans do. It is technology. You need to have controls like technology does, but in both cases, they're subtly different. And it will, the extent to which they're different matters based on what you do. But that lens to start with, and this is a fourth thing, and it has elements of these two things that I am familiar with. Again, don't get out over your skis, right? Keep your weight balanced, and then you can make the right turns.
Well said. So kind of following up on something you said a moment ago, Amanda, around building upon the foundation that you have from, particularly your existing information security and privacy controls. One thing I'm noticing at IAPP conferences, the privacy conferences, and you may be noticing the same, is a sense of excitement from the privacy community, because we get to kind of in some of the words I've heard, do what we've always really wanted to do and like build the foundations that we want to build from a privacy control across the organization using AI as the justification to secure the budgets and the tools and things like that. But what that means is we're kind of self-admitting as an industry, especially in the privacy industry, that we're building upon kind of shaky grounds at the moment. So with that from the perspective, if you are a company that has generally been underinvesting in privacy over the years, how do you take that big first step using AI as a justification to build that stronger foundation for your enterprise?
Yeah, so a couple of different ways I take that is, it's not only is it allowing or opening up for, more resources from a budget perspective, but also time perspective as well, and be able to leverage AI as it relates to building your privacy program and running your assessments, I think is super important. And kind of what I've been seeing in the industry is, again, like, going back to what I was saying about leveraging your existing process and then just using AI, factoring in AI into all those existing process. Then going back to the foundational part of things is, so you want to make sure that you're not dealing with that shaky foundation. You really want to reinforce that foundation to make sure that you have the proper policies and procedures in place to be able to leverage AI for that. So basically giving you more time back and allowing for more resources to use for privacy, because it is constantly evolving. The landscape's always changing, and trying to keep up with it can be very tricky.
Yeah, it is very true. And on that topic of keeping up with the regulations and things like that, let's talk about that a little bit. Dan, in your Cloud Security Alliance white paper, you spoke about an immune response from regulators, and I really kind of liked that metaphor. Would you mind unpacking that a little bit? And then a follow-on to that is, what is reality on the ground? Like, how are we seeing the existence of AI, and particularly generative AI, change some of our more traditional frameworks, like our PCI frameworks that we've needed to comply with now for basically decades?
That is an exceptionally pertinent question, sitting here in the very beginning of April of 2025. And I want to note that the paper, which you keep nicely bringing up, thank you for that, was written in the way before times of mid-2024, when the world seemed quite a bit different, and babies weren't being born and using and saying agentic as their first word, for example. Yeah, so the major piece of legislation that everyone should care about is the EU AI Act. And I say that on day 2 of the large tariff problem, because it's not sure how that's going to work out in the first place, right? It may even actually be overshadowed by it. But there is a reason to think that the European appetite for regulation of AI is informed by its experience rolling out GDPR and the difficulty it had getting traction for sanctions and other types of declarative-like judgments. They are over that. And the question is, how deliberate will they be in this new world? 2 months ago, I might have said that we can expect, compared to GDPR, an accelerated schedule of activity to actually enforce. That may be very accelerated now if it turns into one element of the European Union's tit-for-tat response to tariffs. In which case, the entities who were affected by that fundamentally are just their collateral damage to it. Because it's not just the tech giants that the European Union cares about. So I would say that's very much a question in flux. The degree to which, purely from a U.S. perspective, that an immune response, meaning regulations to change what can be done, what can't be done, we've already gotten a very strong signal from the new administration that they want as little regulation as possible. So, yeah, there are pros and cons to that, as any nuanced and professional compliance person will tell you, but that's a much less ambiguous signal. And that's probably not a very satisfying answer, Joe, but
it is the reality, and it's not our job to sugarcoat things, right? But it's our job to deal with the reality on the ground. Speaking of reality on the ground, Dan, you're mentioning the new legislation, the EU-AI Act, and we're seeing similar things pop up in other jurisdictions around the world. But Amanda, over to you. As you work through these processes and you see other enterprises working through these processes, is that the top of mind framework today, or are folks still foundationally falling back to the GDPRs, the CCPAs, the Quebec Privacy Act, or whatever the more traditional privacy frameworks are that they've been looking to comply with?
I really honestly think it's a mix of all of these, and really, going to Dan's point of the EU-AI Act, and these other laws that I've seen come out, is really focused on the prohibited uses of it and those high risk use cases. And then, it's really going to be dependent on the scope and applicability to your organization or to how you're using AI. But you really have to make sure that you continue to use the foundation of GDPR and any other privacy laws that are applicable to your business or your use of AI. That is really the foundation. There's so many new bills and laws coming up as it relates to AI. It really depends on the use case. Like, for instance, there's like this New York 144 bill as it relates to businesses in their hiring, using AI for hiring practices. So if that's related to your business, then you have to really be watching for that. Being able to leverage any tools that will help you as creating assessments and taking those assessments for any laws that would become applicable for you, I think is really important. But again, you're going to have to still look to those existing privacy laws as you bring in AI. So that's really, really important.
Excellent. So I think you've both done a great job helping to talk about where we are, what are the risks and things like that. I'd love for us to start to pivot to, okay, now let's start to do something about it. Let's start to talk about AI governance and AI security. Before we do that, just a reminder to everyone who is attending, if you have questions, please do put them into the chat box. We'll watch them throughout the presentation and then save a few minutes at the end to address them as well. So let's jump into AI governance, like I was saying. Dan, one of the kind of themes and statements I've heard you mention before is to not approach AI governance with a fear-driven approach. And I like that. I think it's a good mindset to go through. But given the rapid adoption of AI in enterprises, what are the biggest misconceptions you're seeing about AI governance, and how can organizations take really a more realistic and effective approach?
I think that's going to depend on partly who you are in that statement and the nature and the business culture of the entity that you're within. And entities that are charging ahead to capture value with AI systems, and like really as broadly defined as you want. If there is no lever that can be used to bring the consideration of risk and the consideration of compliance as a subset of risk into those conversations, then the work for someone who is trying to do that becomes a combination of culture change or figuring out what the maturity curve looks like for that organization and starting where they are. Again, I think fear takes people out of a rational approach. Fear is useful in a human sense, right? Because it helps us stay on guard, right? We don't let our guard down in places where we need to. Persisting in fear, though, right, robs us of the strengths that our brain offers, right, for rational thought. So if you are in an organization that is fairly mature when it comes to governance, let's say one that is highly regulated even to start with right now, you are much more likely to be able to have productive conversations about the specific risks that AI offers to them. And then the culture change becomes one of education. Here are the ways it's different. Here's the ways that it's similar to what we do. And here is the delta. And it's my opinion that delta is usually a qualitative delta, not a quantitative delta. That there are things that are new concerns that may not have controls in the environment at all, for example, right? As opposed to, well, we need to, have, one more step in this process, right? having a diverse set of stakeholders to be able to talk through that with, right, is more likely to result in effective group action to actually manage some of those risks.
So a follow-on question to that. I would agree that if you're already in a highly regulated industry or one that should be highly regulated, it doesn't always necessarily correlate to your maturity level, right? These conversations should be a lot easier to have because you have structures in place. But I can tell you, I'm running across a lot of enterprises that have nothing. Like they are now scrambling to find anybody that they can uncover to write an AI governance policy so that they can unlock AI in their organization. So if you're in a not mature organization that's not in a highly regulated industry, how do you get this off the ground?
I think there are a variety of ways in which organizations can upskill folks who are already conversant with the existing governance structures. That is a no stall needed kind of approach. The competition for talent it's one of the few areas where there is a competition for talent in the current day and age. I know that organizations like the CIPP do offer upskilling opportunities, and the AIGP cert is actually one I think that has seen a lot of uptake. Education about the topic, though, is really what you're trying to do. It doesn't need to be a cert, right? So I mean, I have an alphabet of letters after my name, but the certs are a way of getting to a point where then you can find value from them. Without a cert, you simply have to have an interest in education and pursuing these things. And again, a community within an organization that can help talk about that from multiple perspectives serves two purposes then. Right? It is upskilling and it is socializing the concept that this is a necessary thing and it is very much a team sport.
Now, we've just had a question come in, Amanda, that I think you are excellently qualified to help us answer. John is asking, would you recommend a standalone Gen AI/agentic AI policy or simply tweaking an existing information governance or data governance policy?
Yes, this is a good question. So I'm on the side of creating a new policy for evolving technologies. You may want to call it AI policy or an evolving technology policy. So this is a separate policy that you would create specific to AI and how it plays without your business. So it could be, you create the scope and applicability to start within your policy, and then you may have, your definitions, right? Because we want to clarify what those definitions are. And then also, what are those prohibited uses? And you want to put your data classification chart in there. So I definitely would say creating a separate policy for that. But then don't forget all of your other policies. So if you are, have your ISO body, IMS policy body, you want to also update existing policies with AI as well. So.
Very good. So Amanda, getting back to kind of the topics I want to talk about today, and folks do keep posting questions. Love to see those. Given your work with the messaging malware mobile anti-abuse working group, which is a group, for those of you who don't know, that focuses on combating messaging and cybersecurity threats, keeping it in the realm of AI, how do you see AI governance playing a role in preventing abuse? Things like AI-generated phishing, deepfakes, data leaks, all while really still allowing your organization to innovate.
Yeah, I'm going to go off of the innovate. That's very important to not create very strict guardrails here. And a lot of this is based on data classification. So when I'm in the discussions with MOG, we always bring in data classification. That's so important. Thinking about using OECD guidelines to help create that classification for you. So I think really it stems from the type of data that you're holding and making sure that you're talking to the stakeholders to make sure that you align on the types of data that are the highest risk. Like you don't want to be putting sensitive data into a public model. So this is, I think, the foundational thing that needs to be built before even bringing in your policies and your procedures. And so that's definitely something that will help with combating any threats and things like that, is making sure you have a clear data classification chart, and then decide how is AI going to be implemented with those different types of data in that chart. So I think that's definitely good. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
No, I was going to emphasize this, right? To your point earlier, Joe, about how do you get started, right? This is an inflection point where data classification, which underpins data protection, it now has a first-party self-interest angle, which is data classification drives better results from training of AI models. And having those two run on parallel rails is a way to overcome friction and for a way to people to see the benefit in doing the right thing.
I was reading a Gartner article the other day that basically pointed out that information or data governance needs a bit of a reboot in the age of AI. I mean, a lot of folks have been struggling with this to do data and information governance from a pure risk point of view. And there's a lot of failed projects out there and things like that. But now we've got like this really big business need where we're saying, you want to save tens of millions of dollars with your AI projects, or you have whole new business units to make hundreds of millions of dollars. You can't do that because, you haven't classified your data. You don't know what data you have until you don't know what data you can safely put into your AIs. And in a lot of ways, it's a huge blocker. And some folks are years away from being able to take advantage of AI because they haven't had these processes and classifications and sensitive data detection in place over the last previous, decade, effectively. So carrying on, Amanda, let's stick with you for a minute here and kind of evolve on the comments you were making. I want to talk about the difference between internally developed AIs versus third-party AIs like ChatGPT and Copilot. So we're starting to see a lot of organizations stand up their own internal development teams, whether it's in the CIO's office or the CTO's office, and they need to bring those under governance so that they know what AIs they have, what those AIs are doing, what data is feeding into the AIs, and then ultimately what security risk we're carrying against this new AI initiative. But from your perspective, how do you think about the third party versus internally developed AIs differently, or are they the same?
Actually, the perspective I take on this is private versus public model. Because I know internally developed models are more private and you have more control over that, right? So, and with the third party tools, think about private versus public, because a lot of these third party tools have both public and private, right, models. And so I like to look at it from those two perspectives, and that's how I'm balancing risk as it relates to like the type of data allowed to go into an internal or private model, or what data is allowed to go into a public model. Just public data can go in a public model. So I kind of like to look at it from those lenses of just the private and public, and then the data classification that's allowed to be used within those. And that really just helps out with our AI governance to create those sort of simple guidelines for its use.
And continuing down this line, let's stick to the topic of maybe, we'll say public or third-party AIs for a moment. I was reading some material the other day that basically theorizes within the next 2 to 3 years, 90% of all SaaS applications, for example, are going to have AI built into it. And so I'm wondering from your approach, Dan, and thinking about how the data, continuing to think how the data gets into these applications, how can you make sure that that data is what you want it to be, that it's the appropriate, timely data, that's the proper training data, high quality, and then a new concept we're starting to hear in the AI governance world, that it's ethically sourced data. How do you approach that problem, sticking with our third-party SaaS AIs that are going to be everywhere effectively?
Yeah, that's like a three-dimensional problem there. Let's break it down slightly. So first off, there's data you use for training the model initially, and then there is data you might use for fine-tuning after the model is largely reached the shape it will. Fine-tuning data could be derived from the use of the system. Right? The foundation is fine. Here's fine tuning to help it get to a better performant level for whatever metric you're trying to optimize. Now, that if you then added a third party layer into that, the question is if it's SaaS, right? a SaaS tool that is taking your data, training its model, and then offering you use of it, right? That's less common right now because that's a very heavyweight integration, basically. Not counting platforms that allow you, like Hugging Face, for example, where it's basically an infrastructure-like offering. But if SaaS-like tools will take and have the ability to take behavioral data and other incidental and derived data from the use of the tools and make it the basis for fine-tuning. And it seems to me that at a minimum, the stack necessary to govern that will start with a policy about whether the organization wants that to happen, right? There's third-party risk management about whether or not it's being done without them asking, for example, due diligence, et cetera. And then if everything's fine and it is being used, there's a question of visibility of the extent and a way to quantify what that means for an evolving risk appetite on the basis of the organization. In other words, it's not a set it and forget it type thing, particularly not right now. I would think at a minimum, organizations, even ones that are fairly mature, don't think about their stance as being anything more than here's the next 6 months. And there will be some review at a minimum to consider whether or not what's happening is what they want to happen. You can extend that even further into other scenarios, but those are the main ones you asked about. It's a complex thing. It's very multifaceted.
Maybe a short follow-up. We're starting as a tool vendor, we're starting to get questionnaires on, are you using our data within your AI to train and basically cross-share that knowledge? And our statement right now is no, your data is your data. We don't have access to train on it. But what sort of preparations, what's the right response from my perspective as a vendor that we should be giving to high mature organizations who are trying to control their AI risk?
So I'll give you two buckets for that. One, for a vendor that represents that they offer synthesis and analysis that is uniquely valuable, and that's derived from a heterogeneous set of information across clients, which is appropriately treated for privacy concerns. Think some combination of anonymization and pseudonymization. You can go all the way to a multi-tenant model there. But there are certain aspects of that environment which might still benefit from what I think is the default nowadays, which is a single tenant model for delivering, which gives people who are still maturing their understanding of the field the warm fuzzy, right? No, this is all you, right? In this tenant, right? We have strong security boundaries based on the semantics of the cloud provider's controls, that your data is here and no one else's data is here, and you're not going to be able to go get anyone else's. So that's the warm fuzzy answer. Amanda, did you want to add to that?
Yes, you absolutely need to be transparent, right? And I think that's so important. A lot of folks are still very hesitant, and giving that transparency and giving the option to not have it on by default, being able to turn off the AI, it is so important. I just wanted to kind of add that to what you were saying. So
100% agree.
Great advice. Thank you. We've had a question come in from Darcy. What practical strategies would you suggest for human intervention or review with AI tools? So Amanda or Dan, who would like to field this one?
Amanda?
Oh, sure. So I think definitely, I've referred to as HIL or human in the loop, and making sure that you continue to do that. I think that's very important, especially like in your vendor process and thinking of shadow IT, like making sure you have a human checking to make sure that the vendor that you choose to bring on for AI reasons is, using it appropriately, and you're able to make sure if it's a public or private model, right? Answering all of those important questions. So that's that human in the loop. But then also on the engineering side, it's very important to use like the OWASP top 10 as it relates to machine learning and AI, to make sure that there's human in the loop there as well. I think it's really going to be throughout the business to make sure that you always have that human in the loop. And also, I believe the EU AI Act requires that as well. So look for that legislation.
And to complement that, right, from a technical perspective, there's a variety of ways in which performance of AI systems can be benchmarked. And there's a sense in which benchmarking and then monitoring for drift is really the only kind of control you have as a defense in depth. In a rock climbing sense, there's an old saying that if you can't tie a knot, tie a lot. And defense in depth is kind of like that. That's the boring reality of it. The sexier part is you can do red teaming as part of your due diligence for tools, right? And at a very minimum, right, with something that is not entirely under your own control. And I would argue, even if it is, you should be threat modeling your system so you understand where the trust boundaries are and what can go wrong.
And that actually, I believe, almost unintentionally answered the next question that we got in. So you've got a SaaS system that you absolutely have to use. They don't give you a way to opt out of having your data trained on. What preventions can you put in place and controls can you put in place to protect against that? You mentioned red teaming. You mentioned threat modeling. Amanda, is there anything else that you could add on to that on controls you can put in place to mitigate the risk if the SaaS is really needed and they're going to go out there and train on your data no matter what you want?
Right. Yeah. So I would think, like, bring back your data classification chart and only allow the type of data to flow through that is allowed by your policy. So it could be, just test data or training data or public data. So don't put in your sensitive data if it's going to be training on data you don't want it to be training on, right? So if you're forced in that scenario, definitely go back to your data classification chart and use the lowest risk type of data.
Yeah, well said. Pivoting to one last topic on enabling governance within your organization, tooling. So we're a tool vendor. We have an AI governance product. I don't think I've shown it to either of you yet. So whatever you say here hasn't been too biased. But as you look across the spectrum of different types of things that are AI governance tools, and I can tell you I'm tracking about 12 different definitions of what an AI governance tool does. From your perspectives, and we'll ask Dan and then Amanda, what do you look for? What are the essential things that these tools should have to help an organization enable their AI governance programs?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems in governance, risk, and compliance is toil, is effort, often manual, disconnected, and not integrated in a functional way, in any kind of automated way. So to the extent that an offering has the ability to integrate and reduce toil with my environment, if I'm that person who's tasked with evaluating it, they start out on the good foot there. So that's number one. Second is the extensibility of it. Right? Does it come with a highly opinionated perspective, or is it meant to be flexible and have degrees of freedom for the really wide variety of policies and ways in which AI has been adopted across organizations? And so while that's standard fit for any kind of tool, I think the degrees of freedom for this topic is greater than most other fields.
Very good. Great answer. Amanda, I'd love to hear your perspective as well. I'm secretly writing down these requirements in the background, by the way.
So the way I'm thinking about this is, like, kind of going back to how it's so important for companies to innovate and that we don't want to stifle innovation. I think this AI governance product, in order to get buy-in from, C-level folks, is to make sure that this is doing you can customize the proper checks and balances that need to be made while still allowing the organization to innovate. I think that's going to be very important. And also, going to Dan's point of automating this. There is a lot of manual tasking with AI governance and reaching out to this person. And did this person approve that? And, what does the vendor risk look like? Being able to get a very easy, dashboard of what is our risk profile right now. And again, can you customize it to the innovation that you're doing at the company to allow for, okay, we only want to have worry about the high risks. We're not going to care right now about anything that's sort of low, moderate risk. We just want to innovate, here are the high risks, and be able to get that information out to stakeholders very easily in like a nice format, like a dashboard would be excellent.
Yeah, I can tell you it's in previous life, worked a lot in the compliance world. It's very much so like the early days of compliance, and most people are just living in Excel right now. Excel secretly runs most privacy and information governance and cybersecurity programs around the world anyway, so let's just admit that. Before we move on to some real world applications and lessons that you both have learned, I'd like to remind folks that if you have questions, to please do put them in the chat. I still see we have a great turnout, so any questions you have, we will jump on those or address them at the end. And on that note, yeah, let's talk about real world applications and lessons that you've both learned. So Amanda, I'll ask you first. Can you share an example of how trustworthy AI has helped an organization that you've seen, whether it's your own or a peer organization that you've worked with, to actually streamline and enable AI adoption? So allow us to go from that, I'm afraid of AI because I don't really have any controls, all my data is not classified, to, oh, great, now I can actually start to capture and test those AI business cases.
Yeah, so again, going off like the fear factor, right, of not knowing. So being educated on this is going to be very, very important. Once someone's educated on here's the safe way to proceed, then that's going to help be able to get adoption for AI use. So I would really start there. And then what I've seen out in the wild that has been very successful is, like, I know everyone has probably seen a lot of like AI bots, a lot of AI assistants, where it's just looking at, someone's knowledge base, and then it's only being, continuously learned on their data and updated with their data. So everything remains private. And then, being transparent on the bot, like being allowed to be transparent to folks that are interacting with the bot is going to be very important. But I think that's really a wonderful, safe way that you can start, getting your hands dirty with AI and using it at your business, is with that AI assistant looking at your data. It's not training a model. It's just using that private data.
Great example. Dan, love to hear any examples you've run across as well of good governance unlocking AI business cases.
I think that the control effectiveness is a full stack question, right? It starts all the way at the top with expression of intention by leadership, but all the way down to boots on the ground and hands on desks, so to speak. So an earnest process of visibility into the move into AI, along with a roadmap of here's how we're going to approach it, goes a long way toward reducing the fear you've mentioned a few times as being one inhibiting factor. And to the extent that you can do that, I think we will enlist allies. I know that most organizations are, as I mentioned, filled with toil, and people are quite happy to have toil reduced. And when there is the framing of this journey includes benefits for all, you have everyone pulling in the same direction. And I'm not going straight to the specific examples, just owing to a sense of propriety with all the people who've been very kind to share their time with me as we developed our work in the CSA. So there's been a whole host of those folks who have volunteered to explain their journey to us. And so I am kind of synthesizing across that without referring to anyone in particular.
Thank you. Yes, it's appreciated to be a part of the broader privacy industry, and then you also respecting their privacy in the process. So that's you're living what you preach there, Dan. So it's absolutely appreciated. One last kind of tactical question, Amanda. I want to, before we drop off, double click into one thing you mentioned about classifying your data. For companies that just haven't done anything so far, how do they start? How do we get going and unlock that part of eventually getting to using that data in AI?
Yeah, so this is a really good activity to run at your organization as you're building up your data classification, just to understanding where you are gathering the data. Another thing to be said that we haven't mentioned yet is your controller and processor roles. So one may be more important than the other. So thinking about the data that you're taking on as a controller, where are you collecting this data? What type of data, what data categories are you collecting? That's very important, and in alignment with many of the privacy laws out there. So making sure that you're classifying the data that way of where you are in your controller role and that you're the ones collecting and determining the purpose and means of that data that you're collecting. And then on the other side of the coin, where you might be a processor and you're providing a service to folks, you may be storing and processing their data. So you want to think about those two separate roles that you have and determining based off of all the data collection points that you have, kind of putting that to paper and then figuring out, based off of what happens if there's an incident, like what type of data is the most important to you and what could harm your reputation if it got leaked. So you really want to think of it from the perspective of like secret, restricted, internal data, and public might be a good example of the 4 different data classification types that you might start to bucket all of the information that you're collecting or you're processing and sort of start from there, and then making sure you align with your stakeholders on like, is this data the most sensitive data, like that's living in our secret data category? So making sure you have that alignment, and then that's sort of building out your policies. That's how you bring in vendors. That's how you build all of your other policies around it. So that's really where I would get started as it relates to data classification, just understanding where all of that's coming in and the data that you're processing, and for those 2 different roles. So don't forget about the controller and processor role.
Thank you for humoring me on that. I mean, as a data and information governance company, kind of everything leads back to data in our world, right? So to us, it's the most important piece. It's, and I believe it is to a lot of companies as well. So let's go ahead and wrap up. Dan, we'll have you go first, and then Amanda. What final piece of advice do you have for organizations that want to strengthen their AI governance, their data protection strategies, and all the foundational steps that are needed before you can scale out your AI initiatives?
Yep. Wherever you are, start there. That's what it boils down to, right? The very, if you couldn't do it yesterday, right? The very next day to start is today. And while that, that's the kind of thing you find on a motivational calendar, it turns out it's true. So every little bit helps. A combination of bringing in insight from the broader industry, CSA, IAPP, the good work that you're doing here to be able to publicize these issues in a very sound way, Joe, right, with RecordPoint. All those types of information can break down the fear and build up knowledge and let people be able to use their talents to make the situation better. And really, it is a 1 foot in front of the next kind of situation. So, and I like John's comment there, is go slow to go fast. It is very much a marathon, not a sprint, which is an odd juxtaposition to how fast all of this has come over us in the last 2 years. But yeah, so first, this is the first day of the rest of your life, and it is also the first and not the only opportunity you're going to have to be able to influence people inside your organization to allow them to see what's going on, and then calmly and rationally evaluate the options that you have for making things better.
Well said. Amanda, before you respond, just a reminder to everyone to get your questions in before we fully wrap up the session. We'll address those in just a second. So yeah, Amanda, parting words, bit of wisdom you'd like to just share with the audience as well on how we unlock AI.
Yeah, I'm really going to go with AI literacy and just making sure that you really, in order to govern something, you got to know about AI. It's really important to educate yourself about it. There is a lot out there, and it's constantly evolving. So I think it's really important to take the time and get training on AI and really understand it, because it can really be helpful, and it can also be very harmful. So I think that's going to be really, really important point. And then also, as you start to use AI, really have that clear business use case. Don't just start using it for everything. I know it goes back to data classification that I always talk about, but have a nice, clear business use case to be using this. I've seen some amazing, areas within the business that we've used it that's like unbelievable, because we have like a clear use case. We, did our due diligence on the vendor. I just think that's a really important step. So educate, and then making sure you have really good business use cases for using AI, and I think you'll be on your way.
Yes, to both of you, I mean, just top-notch ending comments. Thank you for that wisdom. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for watching. Thank you again to Dan and Amanda. I've been saying that it takes an entire community to help us get AI off the ground in our organizations. And you two and your thought leadership are a big part of this. To everyone that's watching, we over here at RecordPoint are eager to hear the challenges that you're facing with AI. And to figure out how we can help you enable those rollouts. Please feel free to connect with myself. Jump over to recordpoint.com to see more information on our version of how we enable AI with our AI governance platform. And then certainly any follow-up questions that you may have, you can reach out to me directly. I'll post a comment in the chat right now. Do want to encourage you, Dan and Amanda actually post some pretty good stuff out on LinkedIn. Follow their thought leadership, continue to learn. And with that, not seeing any questions, last minute questions posted to the chat, I guess that's a wrap. Thank you much, Dan. Thank you much, Amanda. And thank you everyone for watching. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having us, Jim.